You are live.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome to the special ASA meeting, summer meeting of July 18th. The meeting is hereby called to order, and I would like our secretary, Ms. Davis, to call the roll, please.
Thank you. Regent Bloom,
Present.
Regent James,
Present.
Regent McCarthy,
Present.
Regent Porth. Absence is noted, but we do anticipate him joining later. And we do have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Ms. Davis. The item on the agenda for consideration today is the interim student code of conduct. The substantive changes that have been incorporated in this interim policy are a direct result of the revised regulations mandated by the United States Department of Education, as well as changes required by the U.S. Department of Justice. I just want to make a note that much of this did not happen until mid-April. So this is to reinforce what Regent McCarthy had said a few minutes ago before we became live. This has clearly been a monumental effort to put this all together in a very short period of time. There are other non-substantive changes in the document. For instance, the inclusion now of Connecticut State and the change in the title of the chancellor to chancellor from president. So at least brings these items up to date. One of the key things to keep in mind here as we consider this document today is that it is interim. There are various legal challenges underway in several states other than Connecticut that may affect the implementation of some or all of these new Title IX regulations, and additional consultation with internal stakeholders, including the institution administrators who will have to carry this out. The faculty and the students is required to complete the necessary revisions to the student code of conduct. So this is an interim document that we are approving today. And I suspect the committee will be seeing this again sometime during the forthcoming academic year in somewhat revised format. At this point, I would like to turn the discussion over to our interim general counsel, Vita Litvin, the Associate Vice President of Academic Affairs, Dr. Ainsley Diamond, and the Interim Associate Vice President for Enrollment Management and Student Success, Tam O'Day-Stevens. General Counsel Litvin will start by providing some background information from the Department of Education and the Department of Justice, as well as a reference to the proposed interim discriminatory harassment, non-discrimination, and Title IX policy that was just moved through the Board of Regents Human Resources Committee yesterday. And I think Regent James was there for that event. This is part of a package that all of this will eventually make. So with no further ado, as the saying goes, I will turn it over to our General Counsel, Vita Litvin.
Vita, you muted. We still can't hear you, Vita. As we wait for Vita to work on her technology, Kayla, do you want to officially recognize Dr. Sasenker?
Of course. Welcome to our ex officio member, Professor Kalina Sasenker.
Vetus, we still can't hear you.
Maybe we should, let's see.
Vita, if your audio isn't working, would you like to call into the meeting?
Yep. And also, Shannon, are you there? If Vita is having trouble continues to have trouble with her technology, are you able to provide the same background information that General Counsel was going to provide?
Yes, I am still here. Certainly happy to. I believe Vita will be trying to join by phone, however.
Okay. Just want to make sure we have a backup. Thank you.
Certainly.
Chair Bloom,
Yes.
do you want to give Vita a few more minutes, or shall we ask Assistant
give it-
General Counsel?
Let's give it another minute or so, and then we'll ask Ms. Shannon, the Associate General Counsel, to move on.
Thank you.
Ms. Shannon, why don't you start? But, yeah,
Happy to. Sure.
thank you.
As Richard Bloom had previously mentioned, the Student Code of Conduct required numerous updates within a very short order due to the recent April 2024 Department of Education amendments to the Title IX regulations that are scheduled to take effect on August 1st of 2024. There have been numerous changes to the regulations, and as a result, CSU retained a consultant to assist in revising the Title IX policy, as well as the sexual misconduct reporting, supportive measures, and process policy. However, due to the changes, there were also a number of required amendments that needed to be made to the Student Code of Conduct. In the current Code of Conduct, there were numerous references to sexual harassment, stalking, intimate partner violence, and the such that is actually going to be amended by the new interim discriminatory harassment, non-discrimination, and Title IX policy. So as you'll see in the materials, the Student Code of Conduct is making a number of changes by removing those sections from the code and explicitly referencing the new interim discriminatory harassment, non-discrimination, and Title IX policy. And as elaborated in the staff report, there are quite a few sections in the code that are being changed. that will all be covered by that new policy as required by the Title IX regulations. In addition, there are a number of provisions in the Student Code of Conduct that needed some legal changes as a result of state and federal law, specifically as it addressed self-harm provisions and whether a student can be disciplined for certain self-harm conduct. And so what you'll see in the new materials and the new version of the Student Code of Conduct is a revision to that front. I see that we have Vida has joined again.
Thank you. Yes, my apologies. I've had some technical difficulty. My computer froze and I had to restart again. And so I couldn't unmute myself. So my apologies. All right, so can you tell me where we are?
Certainly,
Go ahead, Ms. Walsh.
I was giving a brief background as to the required quick changes that are necessary to the Student Code of Conduct as a result of the new Title IX regulations that need to be implemented by August 1st. Some of the work that has been done to stand up a new policy that will cover the requirements for that regulation and how it has impacted the Student Code of Conduct, as well as the changes that we see with respect to self-harm provisions.
Okay, fantastic. So it sounds like we've covered what we needed to cover in that regard, right? So the Title IX regulations required this change, and there are also additional revisions to the Student Code of Conduct in addition to the Title IX, so the self-harm provision. Within that, we've worked with the Department of Justice to ensure that the code is fully compliant with federal and state law. And I'm sure, as Shannon has mentioned, we have removed the language that subjects expressions of self-harming behavior to disciplinary procedures. And additionally, the code now provides language for students to request reasonable accommodations when students are undergoing disciplinary procedures. So I think still there is a significant amount of work that remains for the Student Code of Conduct. And among other necessary revisions, the disciplinary procedures will need to be carefully revised to ensure compliance with all applicable federal and state law. And as Regent Bloom has noted, that there are numerous legal challenges underway in several states, not necessarily in Connecticut, but those challenges may affect the implementation of some or all of the new Title IX regulations. And while the legal challenges that are proceeding through the courts have not had a direct impact on Connecticut, there remains a slight possibility that the legal challenges may have some effect on the implementation of Title IX regulations. So given the pending legal challenges and some of the remaining revision work that's still required to fully update the Student Code of Conduct, we're recommending that the student code be titled as an interim policy. And Dr. Ainsley Diamond and Dr. Tamara Deo-Stevens will address in more detail additional revisions and the ongoing work for the student code. I don't know if I've missed anything. I'm sorry I wasn't there for the first portion of it, but I look forward to our discussions on this critical initiative to support a safe, inclusive, and compliant educational environment across the CSCU system. And we can open this up for any questions or comments.
Dr. Stevens, do you want to pick it up for the moment?
Sure. I'll give a little bit of background.
We'll have questions at the end of the after the presentations.
Thank you, Regent Bloom. Thank you, Regent Bloom. Pandemic has caused more than a year of loss, isolation, and uncertainty for many, specifically our college and university students. Our campuses nationally are grappling with the proliferation of mental health issues with their students. Over 60% of college students between the ages of 18 to 24 have identified that they're struggling with anxiety and depression, which falls under the ADA umbrella. When I was an associate dean, this was about 20 years ago, Campuses could discipline students who were documented for self-harming behaviors. State and federal laws now require all institutions of higher ed to adjust those practices and policies. Campuses are now providing individual assessments and fair processes that support today's students and their needs. And so that's generally what has changed within the self-harm. But our students are coming to our campuses with a lot more problems and issues and needs, and we have to take these into consideration when we're working with them across our system. Thank you.
Dr. Diamond. Thank you, Dr. Stevens.
Hello, everyone. So the CSCU institutional leaders have expressed the need to separate academic misconduct from the code and establish a separate academic integrity policy with more robust language concerning artificial intelligence. Additionally, CSCU institution behavioral misconduct procedures need to be further evaluated and revised to ensure consistent best practices throughout the system. And again, we keep on saying this over and over again, but I think it bears repeating. This is an interim policy, and you are going to be hearing a lot of us moving forward into this academic year as we continue to revise and adapt to changes not only happening in Connecticut, but nationwide. And I will hand this back to you, Regent Bloom.
Thank you very much, Dr. Diamond. Questions or comments from the regents? Regent McCarthy, are you raising?
Yes, I'm going to kind of restate something that I said before the meeting started. And I, again, express my appreciation to Vida and Ainsley and Tara and their staffs who undertook this very complicated assignment that is based on influences from many different angles, and something that I understand is absolutely necessary. From the standpoint of somebody whose job really is to make the policy, not to implement it, I'll say this is, first of all, a time when I'm so glad that you're implementing the policy and I'm not, because clearly it's very complicated and nuanced. And in dealing with these things, you all know it's how vitally important it is that we adhere to the nuances and that we support our students by adhering to the minute details of these policies. I'm not taking this lightly. But I'm glad to say that I recognize that removing a number of things and putting them in the student code of conduct was one main effort that had to be made. I did suspect that when I was reading things, so I got that message. But this may be an unfair question because those of you who are implementing the policies are going to have to now adjust to a different world where you're filing a complaint or a report or making a decision and supporting that in reference to the new policies and the new expression of these policies. And it's vitally important, as you know, that you do that and not that you fall back into adhering to old ways of doing it. So what I'm asking, this is a lead up to a big question. Are there major differences, non-procedural, but just major philosophical differences that are involved in this? Because that's where I had trouble finding out if this was accommodation to new legislation, accommodation to new challenges, or whether there really were generally major changes that are required here. Fair. You're free to say that's not a fair question, because I don't know if it is or not either. So anyway, it was what puzzled me in reading these many separate perspectives on this change.
Regent McCarthy, may I attempt to address the big question?
Yes.
All right. So I think it may be helpful to sort of think of the changes are multifaceted, as you mentioned, right? So there are influences that are coming from multiple directions, the Department of Justice, Title IX regulation, and the internal pressure from our stakeholders about the confusion of multiple policies covering the same subject matter. So for example, we had Title IX, currently, as policies are written, we have 3 policies that cover sexual misconduct that is regulated by Title IX. And so what is happening here really on a large, I think, systematic level is that with the help of Lori Lamb and Kim Pacelli, our Title IX coordinator, we are streamlining all of the discriminatory and harassing type of behavior under one comprehensive policy. That's really the systemic shift that's occurring here and is impacting all of these other policies, including the Student Code of Conduct, which carried a component of sexual misconduct that's regulated by Title IX. And so we're removing that component out of the Student Code of Conduct and placing it under the jurisdiction of one overarching policy for the entire system that not only governs students, but also faculty and staff under the same rules, right? So that's one big systemic shift. With respect to the Student Code of Conduct, I would say, you know, if we were kind of to put all of the changes into large buckets, it would be number one, general changes to the preamble, to the definitions section, to the jurisdiction and the scope. That's sort of like one big bucket. And then another bucket is changes to the prohibited conduct section, which includes the Title IX component. It includes the self-harm provision and also adds language to the Student Code of Conduct that would help our administrators deal with protests on campus, particularly given the state of affairs nationally and the fact that we are in an election year. We need to have additional language in the code that would allow our administrators to address those types of situations with the students. So we've worked with the chiefs of police across our campuses, and they've requested particular language to be included to help them deal with situations that come up on campuses. And so I would say those are some of the large categories of changes that were made to the code. There are other changes. Obviously, there were lots of changes, editorial changes, definitions changes that are significant. But I think for our purposes, you know, understanding those large buckets is really important. Does that help?
Yes, Vita, thank you. That's extremely helpful, and gives those very large buckets that make it very clear that this is an important process to go through. So I appreciate that. That was a very the kind of summary that I was looking for. Because you know, as board members, we're trying not to be involved in the nitty-gritty, but we're also trying not to absent ourselves from major policy discussions. And with those 3 categories that you put forward, you've put us solidly back in the major policy discussions buckets. So that helps me a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent James?
Thank you very much for that clarity and for the question, Jim, and the way you phrased it. I have a request that as we present this to the full board, I believe at the August board meeting, that we introduce it with exactly that same level of executive summary and clarity, Vita, that you just gave us, because I understand that when you get into any kind of regulatory changes, there's so much detail. And disclosure requirements require that we receive all of that detail. But that helpful categorization of how these, you know, the different components and what we need to pay attention to. So I don't know if you know what you just said, but it would be very helpful if we could put that into the document as the introduction. And I would appreciate that. The second question I have is, how will we, because it is so long and complex, how will we ensure that the different constituents understand the policy and the regulations and what is required of them? Is there some type of a training? Because I think this is more than just, we need to post the new policy up on the website. So I'd like some, just some thought in terms of how the institution is thinking about making sure that people understand these changes, and understand what the new regulations are, without having to be as expert as those of you who have been working on this for many months, to clarify what we need to do. That's not a question that I expect you to answer now, but it is one that I'd like to have us have some sense of before we get to the August meeting.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I would appreciate my colleagues also chiming in here. I think one important piece to note here, as Regent Bloom has said, that this is an interim policy. There remains a significant component here with regard to the procedural aspect of the student code that has not been revised thoroughly, and that requires additional work, and that will require significant training of our student code administrators and the deans and executive leaders to really understand the shift here and implement some of these changes. So thank you for that comment. We are working on that. And as we develop the procedures, the changes to the code and the procedural changes will require additional training. So that will be part of the development of the procedures. And then obviously the implementation piece will come with training.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions?
Vida, I just want to echo what you just said about something to the effect of, if I can remember what I just said, because I used to find it when someone would say to me, "Oh, those comments were great. Could you just use those again?" And my honest answer would be, "I don't remember what I just said." But remember, in this case, Vida, there's a recording.
Yes.
You can go to YouTube and find out what you just said, because it was really well done. So
Pam has a secret recording.
I give you a solution. Go to the tapes.
Okay, with the videotape, yeah.
We'll provide Vita with a transcription. It's
Great.
all good. Tamara?
As the procedures are updated, it'll be done with a team across the system. So the procedures will not be done in a vacuum with just folks from system office. This will require the support of various individuals from the various campuses across our system. In addition to that, then a plan for training and the rollout after the processes and the code has been approved will occur. I know for a fact that CT State has run a compliance retreat twice a year. Since I was just recently transferred over from that space that we organized. They had a compliance retreat in June, which is almost 4 days long, addressing a lot of these issues. I also know Kim just did a Title IX training with a whole group of folks from across the system. So we know that that's part of this entire system of changes, that the individuals that are also administering these changes need to know the regulations that have changed, the procedures that have changed, and they're able to institute those regulations across the system in tandem.
And there are, I take it, there are Title IX coordinators. There are people responsible for this on each of the campuses. And
that is correct. Yeah.
And I assume the deans of students or their equivalent will also be involved in whatever in the training. And because that was a concern. Regent James' question was the concern I had also. This has to be carried out on the campuses. It's not carried out here. And that's the crucial part of this.
And I'm glad to speak to that. Hello, everyone. I'm Kim Pacelli. I'm the aforementioned interim Title IX coordinator for the system.
Yes.
It's really great to connect with all of you. I'm an external. This is a cool gig for me. I'm usually just an external consultant, but now I'm sort of in this quasi-embedded role in sort of playing this role of trying to do some oversight and work on behalf of the system at large. And everything that's been said by those of you from the regents and from staff colleagues is absolutely right about training. And I think there are a number of technical requirements around Title IX in terms of what kind of training that we need to do. And there's some adjacent training under some other federal laws and of course state law in the sexual harassment space, and making sure that all of those bases are covered. And then I think there's also the cultural training, right? Explaining to folks across the system about why the policies have been reconfigured in this way and the benefit of doing so. And I think there's training for all students and staff so that folks understand why CSCU and its institutions and the institutions that comprise it are, environments where there is no discrimination and harassment, and what to do if they have a concern themselves or on behalf of a colleague or another person. And so there's, a lot is just that training and consciousness raising about the procedures and how to bring reports or complaints forward. But then there are other training, to your question, around the Title IX coordinators on each of the campuses. Within CT State has a Title IX coordinator for its system office, but then there are deputies who serve as the Title IX coordinators on all of those campuses. And then obviously for the other 5 institutions, they all have coordinators. They've been working really closely with me to give input and help to design not only this policy, but the procedures as well as what we're working on as well. So there's going to be lots of pockets of training that will need to happen, and a lot more procedural detail for the individuals who are either serving as Title IX coordinators on any of the campuses or doing other work that may need to be done under the procedures. So potentially serving as an investigator or facilitating an informal resolution, for example, individuals who have decision-making roles or appeals decision-making roles, making sure that we're ensuring that everyone not only understands what the federal and or state requirements are, what the policy requirements are, but also have the skills that they need to do the work with the care that it desires.
Okay.
Regent McCarthy?
Yes, thank you. These comments have all been extremely helpful, and they've made me more impressed with the collective effort that you've all engaged in. One of the big issues that I picked up with, you just addressed, Kim, and that was the decision to describe these as interim policy changes, because there are inevitably other things coming down the road. I think that makes perfect sense, and it's absolutely essential that take place as you've designed it. It also occurs to me, I think back to previous times when I had to be more involved in the detailed implementation of policies like this, that, oh my God, that makes it even more complicated, because now we have to train people to get used to the substantial changes that have taken place between the historical policies and the interim policy. But it's inevitable that interim policy is going to be followed by possibly another interim policy or a final. The training has to be. You can see, this. I mean, this is not going to be a one and done approach. Every time you make the changes, you're going to have to go through some version of this again. So I just hope that you're doing whatever you can do, and I don't know what that might be, because it's very complicated, but it's going to stay complicated for a long time. And then there might be a court case which upends.
There will be a court case, I think,
that might upend some whole part of it, and there we, I don't even want to think about what this could unfold. But
the other point I just want to add. It's important to have perhaps a separate training for the president and provost. They're the ones, the training can't be just at the level of the people carrying it out. The presidents and the provosts have to understand what the overall responsibilities are here. And that's different from what the Title IX coordinators and the student conduct officials are going to be doing. So I think that just adds to the burden, but I think there needs to be kind of a separate session to make sure that the presidents and provosts, because I've seen situations in past life where things have fallen through the cracks in part, or otherwise been because the presidents and provosts really weren't familiar with what needed to happen.
Ira, let me just say, I participated in one of those provost training sessions in a very large system where we were presented with cases and asked the question, is this a current policy of the system, or is it something that we've just fallen into? And the 26 provosts in the room, some of whom were quite experienced and some of whom were new, averaged about a 50% success rate in answering. It was one of the most humbling experiences I've had. Sort of, you're in charge of this, you think you know what's going on, you get half the questions right because it's way more complicated than you think. So I want to second what Chairman Blum just said, that training for presidents and provosts, and they're not going to like this.
They're not going to like this, yeah.
But it's really maybe not as often as for the frontline people, maybe not with every interim policy iteration, but at some point, and particularly addressing the kind of big issues that Vida summarized so well.
Other comments or questions? If not, I will make a motion to approve the interim policy as set forth. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The motion is carried. So the student conduct policy is approved for being moved forward to the full Board of Regents at its special July 31st meeting. So we're not done with the summer yet, even Okay, any other comments for the good and welfare of the cause? Or I'll entertain a motion that's usually very popular to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved. Second.
I see there's a motion and second. All regions in favor of adjourning.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion statements record that this motion was carried unanimously. Again, I want to thank everybody, the regents and the staff, for their participation on a nice warm summer day here in New England.
And I want to say again, we were able to have one of the shorter meetings ever because so much work went into this on the part of so many staff members.
Yeah.
So that's extraordinarily helpful and appreciated. Thanks.
Thank you. Enjoy your summer, everyone.
Yes.
We'll see you all in
Next
13 days. 13 days.
Thank you very much.
Virtually.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your WebEx recording has stopped.
And I want to thank the people
live
for participating from a distance.